Hello, welcome to another of the Richardson lectures on river landscapes in the UK. This time we're talking about flood management strategies. We need to be able to identify and explain both hard and soft engineering strategies and also to assess the limitations of these strategies. So, flooding leads to social, economic and environmental impacts, and that's why it's important that we can try and manage these flood events. Flooding is a natural process though, and most flood management strategies don't actually stop flooding. Instead, they aim to reduce the frequency of flooding and the level of damage done. So we've got two types, hard engineering and soft engineering. We're going to start with hard engineering. So this involves using large, often man-made structures that are going to try and reduce flooding. They control the natural processes. Now, they usually come with a big negative impact on the environment. They often don't look very nice, they're also very expensive. But they are preferred in areas where we've got a high risk of flooding to valuable land, so property, industries. This is the preferred method because it is very effective. So our first strategy are dams and reservoirs. Now a dam is a wall across a river valley. It blocks the river's course and allows us to control the flow of the river. Now in doing so, by blocking off the river, it creates a reservoir, a man-made lake behind the dam wall. And here water is stored, as you can see in these two images here. Now during a particularly wet period, we can store water in that reservoir and reduce the flow of water downstream, therefore preventing flooding effectively. But during dry periods of time, we can also release more water to ensure that there's an even water supply further downstream. So a very, very good way of controlling the flow of water through our river catchment. And they have some additional benefits. We can create hydroelectric power as water is forced through the dam. As it moves vertically through the dam, it can turn turbines to create electricity. The reservoir provides a supply of drinking water. It provides water for irrigation and also creates an area for recreation. But there are also some disadvantages associated with dams and reservoirs. They are incredibly expensive. And when they're being created, the reservoir that forms behind the dam floods large areas of land, so we lose a lot of habitat, and often entire villages are lost as a result of creating the reservoir. If they're not maintained very well, sediment can also build up behind the dam wall, and that prevents sediment from travelling downstream and can actually lead to increased erosion further downstream. And also, if the dam wall does break, and we have had occurrences in history where this has happened, the amount of water released in one go from the reservoir would lead to a catastrophic flood. Another method is channel straightening. Now this involves changing the shape of the river's course, cutting out meander bends. Meanders slow down the flow of the river, and by using channel straightening we can speed up the flow of the river. And that's particularly useful if you want to avoid vulnerable locations. So here's a town close to a meander bend. Well, if we can actually create a new straight course and get rid of this old meander loop, we can, if any flood is going to be bypassed from the town, reducing damage to that high value area. And the channels can also be modified to be lined with concrete, quite common in urban areas. And that concrete, even though it looks rather ugly, does create a smoother surface, reducing friction and again increasing flow, moving that flood water quickly through the system away from these high value lands. Now those are very unattractive and they do destroy important river habitats. So a lot of invertebrates living in the river have no longer a place to live. And actually, even though speeding up the flow does reduce the risk of flooding from those valuable areas, it's not stopping the flood, and instead that flood is going to move somewhere else and cause damage elsewhere. Another hard engineering method are using embankments. These are artificial levees on the sides of the river's banks, and what they do is they increase the capacity of the channel, allowing the river to hold more water before the river floods. And in a similar way, we can also widen the river channel and deepen it. It also increases the capacity of the channel, holding more water, less likely to flood. But again, these are also expensive, they look unattractive in most places, using lots of concrete and stone. And again, similar to dams, because they're holding back water, if they do break, and we have again seen this happen, the flooding can actually be of increased severity. And our last hard engineering strategy are flood relief channels. This is also quite similar to the channel straightening, where we're actually creating a straight river course to avoid high value areas. So here's our town again with our meander. And on here we can see now we've got this flood relief channel. This is a channel that's only used in times of flood, and we can control that. So we can see the red arrows there showing the normal flow of the river, but during a time of high discharge we can divert the flow, open a gate and allow the flow of water through that flood relief channel, avoiding the town and reducing the flooding there. Now, similar to channel straightening, that's only moving water from one place to another, so it's not stopping flooding, it's just moving the problem on to somewhere else. And again, very expensive project and rather unattractive, particularly with these concrete lined channels. So then we can look at our alternative approach, soft engineering strategies. And this involves working with natural processes, working with nature to reduce both flood risk and the damage done. One of the main aims of soft engineering, though, is to reduce the discharge in the river. It's trying to hold back water on the land before it reaches the river, reducing the overall discharge. If you can remember, think back to when we looked at storm hydrographs, it's about trying to extend that lag time. And if you have a longer lag time, longer time between that rain reaching the river channel, you will actually reduce the peak discharge and reduce the maximum damage done by a flood. And this approach is becoming increasingly popular because not only is it proving very effective at reducing flooding, but it also has other environmental benefits. So here's our first one, it's planting trees or afforestation. Trees are brilliant at catching rainfall, they intercept rainfall, which reduces the amount of water which reaches our river channel and therefore reduces flood risk. But over the last few thousand years, many parts of the UK's uplands have actually been heavily deforested, and now many of them often have either bare slopes or very low growing vegetation, which doesn't do as much to intercept the rainfall. And so as a result we have rapid surface runoff off our uplands, and that's getting straight into the river catchments and leading to those higher discharges. So by planting more trees we can increase interception and therefore reduce discharge and reduce the risk of flooding. There are some limitations though of the afforestation. Even though the planting trees is going to reduce discharge, after particularly heavy periods of rainfall we're still probably going to see some flooding take place. And the trees do take a long time to grow. We're going to be looking at sort of 15-20 years before they become useful at really intercepting large volumes of rainfall. So it's not a short-term solution. And as a result of that, local vulnerable people are really going to prefer a hard engineering strategy, something like an embankment to protect their home, other than rather than relying on trees further up the valley. Another soft engineering strategy is to use floodplain zoning. Now this is where we use careful planning of the land to reduce the damage done. Now it says at the bottom there, this does not actually do anything to reduce flooding or stop flooding, but it does significantly reduce the impacts. So it's about managing the land. So in this example here we've got livestock grazing in sports fields closer to the river, and our industry and housing much further away. We're putting our increased areas of land value further away from the river and at higher elevation. So if we do experience flooding, the damage is going to be significantly less. We're going to have some impacts to these fields for a period of time, but that's going to clear. If it was housing there, we'd have a much higher economic and social impact. Now, this is a difficult strategy to implement because actually across the UK, a lot of river floodplains have actually already been built on. So this can only work in areas that haven't yet been built on. Then we've got river restoration. This involves reversing the work done by a lot of hard engineering strategies. As I said, this is becoming an increasingly more popular approach is soft engineering. And so river restoration involves returning rivers to a more natural state, putting the meander bends back in, allowing the wetlands to develop, to slow down the flow of water, holding the water back in the landscape before it reaches those more vulnerable areas. And working alongside other rewilding projects, including the replanting of trees, afforestation, it can have significant long-term impacts in reducing flood risk. I really do think this is the way we're going to be going in this country in the future to manage our flood risk. Because there are additional benefits, it's also very much more attractive, brings visitors to the area, and has a huge positive impact on habitat and wildlife in the areas where we're restoring rivers. However, a bit like afforestation, the vegetation does take some time to establish. So this is something we need to be starting now and see more of now, getting ready for the next sort of 10-20 years. And our last soft engineering strategy is to use flood warnings and preparation. Now this involves no changes to the river whatsoever, but can have a significant impact on reducing numbers of lives lost in major flood events. It gives people time to move their valuables upstairs in their home and also to evacuate, and even give the emergency services time to respond. So putting out good advanced weather warnings and flood warnings can reduce the amount of lives lost in a flood. So yeah, flooding is not prevented using flood warnings, but it can reduce the number of lives lost. And lastly, we'll take a look at a couple of exam questions. Now here's the first one. It's figure 15, a diagram of a flood management scheme. Now this one is actually from Boscastle, which is the example we're going to look at in the next video. But it doesn't tell us that in the text. We're just given the diagram. And it says, suggest how the flood management scheme shown in figure 15 helps to reduce the risk of flooding. It's a 4 marker. So 4 marker will have to really have 2 explained points. And of course use figure 15. So we can see we've got a range of strategies on here. I'm not going into too much detail on those today because in the next video I'm going to talk more specifically about what's happened in Boscastle. But what we need is 2 clear strategies chosen from figure 15 and clearly explaining how that's going to reduce the risk of flooding. So picking 2 and clearly explaining how it has a positive impact on reducing flood risk. You shouldn't be talking about generic flood management strategies here. This is not about generic flood management. We don't need to talk about dams and reservoirs because there is not any in sight. It's just the ones that we can see in figure 15. And finally, one more question. We've got figure 17 here, a diagram showing floodplain zoning. And it says, explain how soft engineering strategies can help to reduce the impact of river flooding. Use figure 17 and your own understanding. Again, it's a 4 marker. So we want clear explanation of 2 soft engineering strategies. Only talking about soft here, we're just talking about 2 soft engineering strategies. And of course we must use figure 17, so you should really start with that. Explain how floodplain zoning works, making clear reference to figure 17. So we can talk about what they've included on their diagrams. So the land closest to the river, in this case, is used for pasture for grazing. So picking that out from the diagram and explaining why that is an example of a low value land use and therefore why it's been chosen to be close to the river and why our settlements are up at higher elevation further from the river because they are high value land. That's it for this video. Next time we'll be looking at a specific flood management scheme in Boscastle.